Joining us now here in studio, Jim Milway. He's Executive Director of the Institute for Competitiveness and Prosperity at the University of Toronto. Jim, it's good to see you again. Thanks for coming in. Good to see you, Steve.
Thank you.
Okay, let's just, by way of background, get started here. Task Force on Competitiveness, Productivity, and Economic Progress. Long name, what is it?
Well, it was a task force appointed way back by Premier Harris when he asked Roger Martin, who's the Dean of the Rotman School, to head up this task force to look at Ontario's competitiveness and prosperity and how we're doing relative to other large states and provinces here in North America and around the world.
So you're a decade or so into your mandate right now?
Exactly. We just released our 10th annual report in a couple of weeks ago.
And what's the big picture?
Big picture is that 10 years ago we had this prosperity gap with large U.S. states. We still have that prosperity gap. It's a bit wider in constant dollars. But we've made some good progress on certain areas, especially with regard to public policy. We think that public policy 10 years ago was not so supportive of prosperity and competitiveness and productivity. It's come a long way. The big challenge going forward is, will business leaders and businesses pick up the opportunity that the public policy has created for them and become more innovative, more productive, and driving prosperity for all Canadians.
Let's pick that apart a bit, because 10 years ago, the Conservatives were in power in Ontario.
That's right.
And you say that in terms of public policy, even they weren't doing the kinds of things that we needed to do in order to be more prosperous?
Absolutely. So, for example, one of the things that was going on when we started was there was some cutting of education spending. And if you believe that a knowledge economy is upon us, then why would you be cutting spending in things that help create knowledge? So that wasn't too good. The provincial government, along with the federal government, between the two of them, were taxing new business investment very aggressively. We had high corporate tax rates, we had the provincial sales tax, and we also had a capital tax. So this is a tax that says to a business person, once you do what we think is good for the economy, that is to say invest in equipment and plant and equipment, we're going to keep taxing you every year. So it's the gift that keeps on giving. I mean, it's probably the stupidest tax known to man, but it was being administered at the federal and provincial levels. So just in terms of tax policy and where we were spending our money, there were a lot of things that could be improved.
And now we have the harmonized sales tax.
We have the harmonized sales tax.
And you're happier with that?
Very happy. We have the harmonized sales tax here in Ontario. I would be happier if it had stuck in British Columbia, because there's no benefit to Ontario for having British Columbia not performing to its full potential. We've got lower corporate tax rates on income. We've gotten rid of the capital tax. And so in terms of tax, there really isn't much more we would ask other than let's get innovative now. So in tax policy, what we've done here in Ontario and in Canada is we have adopted best practices from around the world. It'd be nice if Canada could be an innovator in tax policy.
I will save for the debate the question which says, now that you've enjoyed all these tax cuts and are sitting on all this money, why aren't you hiring people? But hold off for that for now.
Okay, I'll hold that thought.
I do want to pick up on something you said earlier, which is that we had a prosperity gap, and we still do, and it may be even a little bit bigger.
That's right.
What is that?
Okay, the prosperity gap measures, it's the difference in gross domestic product per capita, GDP. So GDP measures how well have we Ontarians done in creating value, economic value from our human resources, physical resources, natural resources. We've created products and services that people will pay money for here in Canada and around the world. And so it measures just how well our economy performs in innovation terms, in productivity terms, also in work effort terms. You can get higher GDP by having more people work or working longer hours. And in fact, Ontario's done a decent job on that front. Where you want the sustainable growth in your GDP is in productivity. And that's where we've been growing, but not so fast.
So we have a prosperity gap because we're still not as productive as we need to be.
Correct. And that's not just against the Americans. That's against pretty well every other developed economy in the world. One of the things we're really good at in Ontario is finding jobs for people, and Ontarians are looking for work. So Ontarians want to work. Our economy creates jobs. We're not terribly productive when we're on the job.
Is this just to say that the economy is not growing as fast as you'd like it to, or is it more than that?
It's a slightly more than that. I would like to see the economy growing faster. All of us would, especially when we're in this current downturn. Longer term, though, I'd like to see a faster growth rate in the economy, and I'd like to see it come from productivity. By and large, the growth that we've had since the start of the 21st century has been in more and more Ontarians working, not from being more productive. Or that, that's where we're doing well, is in job creation. That's not going to last as the demographics become more and more important or urgent as you know, people retire and we're just going to have fewer workers around. So if we want a sustainable growth in our economy, productivity really is the way to go.
And productivity, just so I'm clear, obviously a more complicated concept than the way I'm about to articulate
Don't worry.
it. But essentially, what it took me 10 people to get done last year, I only need 8 for now. I have the same output, I'm therefore more productive. Is that what business wants?
Those are two different questions. What business wants and what productivity is are two different things. Okay. Now, I think you've got half the definition, or one element of the definition of productivity correct. So productivity is a ratio of how much are you putting out in dollar terms that people are willing to buy versus how many hours does it take you to create that. Well, what you described is working on the denominator, right? We'll get the same output with fewer workers. That's not all that sustainable because you can only shrink that so low. The way for productivity that you really want is to work on that numerator. Can we produce products and services that people will pay more for? Higher value added, and that gets you productivity. And that's the kind of forgotten side of productivity. What you described is the efficiency side. What we're more interested in is the value-added side.
And is business also more interested in the numerator than the denominator?
That's a very good question. I think most business people will, when you tell them about productivity, they'll think about efficiencies. You know, how do we cut the workforce? But the ones that are successful are thinking about the top line, not just the kind of the middle line.
You were going to say the bottom line until you realized
you are interested.
Different connotation.
What value added is the combination of that bottom line, profits plus wages, right? So when productivity is going up, it's not just that a whole bunch of dollars are flowing into the pockets of business people or to corporations. It's wages are going up. That's what you want all this productivity for. It's not to slash and burn wages so that the capitalists can make more money. It's the capitalists and the workers both make more money.
Gotcha. We hear a lot about industry clusters, biotech, green energy. Have we done a good enough job over the past decade in encouraging these clusters to do their thing and boost productivity that way?
Clusters are, business agglomerations of businesses, suppliers, skilled labor, skilled capital that work to dominate a current industry, an industry in somewhere in the world. And so one of the things Ontario is really good at is automotive. We have an automotive cluster here in Ontario.
We're supposed to be #1.
I think we are.
In North America.
Yeah. We have a high-tech cluster in Waterloo. The thing about clusters is that if a cluster gets going, it's going to get going by and large on its own accord. The fact that, or the idea that government can somehow say, we want a clean energy cluster here in fill in the blanks, there's very little evidence that ever works. The best thing government can do is almost get in front of the parade. When it sees that a cluster is developing or has emerged or is really starting to go gangbusters, what government needs to be thinking was, what can we do to help this thing grow along and grow even more? As opposed to government saying, gee, we need to create a cluster here in our town because that's where all the action is.
So the McGuinty government's approach to creating a clean energy cluster by offering big incentives to get people to convert their farms or put up solar panels or whatever, is that essentially what you've just described?
Yeah, that's trying to get in front of something, and they're in line with like 50 other states and 9 other provinces and how many other countries. Everybody's on the green energy bandwagon.
Do you approve?
No. I think what you see, especially the Green Energy Act here in Ontario, I don't think has been a rip-roaring success. I don't think it will be a rip-roaring success. I think this notion somehow that we're going to pick solar and wind and say, you consumers out there, you ought to pay really high prices for these great technologies. For a while to establish a business. Listen, we'll see. I know, that's the theory.
That's the argument, anyway.
That's the argument, that's the theory, and someone show me where that's ever worked at all. I mean, that's always the theory that, for a while you'll pay more, and then we'll get the prices down. I mean, I don't see that happening in the ethanol industry in the United States, for example. So,
wait a sec. Their subsidies are ending this month. They're supposed to be ending this month anyway.
I'll believe it when I see it.
Okay.
I'll believe, especially with the Iowa primary coming up.
Right.
I just don't think that's going to happen. I could be wrong.
But you never know.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do one more question here, which is looking ahead, the most urgent challenges, as you've outlined them in your task force report, where do you see them?
That's a good question. I'd say the most urgent challenges are for businesses to adopt the innovation, productivity, value-added religion. I think too many of our businesses here in Ontario are taking the safe route. And and it's not so much so that business is going to wake up tomorrow and say, gosh, the task force is right, we ought to be more productive and innovative. I think this is where government can help. Government needs to make their life a little less easy through more free trade. So I think what Ontario and Canada are doing now with the EU in terms of trade, it's not just a matter of opening up markets for our businesses, it's also making them more uncomfortable because of imports. So I think it's all about getting our businesses off the status quo, knocking them off the comfortable existence, and forcing them to adopt, to be more productive, to have more strategies of value added rather than just copying.
That's a huge cultural change.
I wouldn't say it's a cultural change. I just want to argue that a bit. It's an environment change. I think we're wired no differently than business people, especially in the U.S. Some of the research we've done would indicate that. But all of us are humans, and nobody will do anything unless some customer or some competitor is chomping at the bit and is forcing the business to. So that may be a culture change, but I think it's more of a change in the environment, change in the situation, change in the context.